Hello guys, this is your friend Fanfickage 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto met Tenten during the Forbidden Scroll incident and build Harem? Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now start the fanfic. Tenten was sitting in a cabin in the woods and thought, Mom, why is it so hard to keep going? I want to prove to everyone and myself that women can be just as good as men, but it's hard when nobody really supports me. As she closed her eyes, a noise from outside drew her attention and she looked out and saw a blonde-haired boy about her age with a huge scroll on his back, and she thought, what kind of idiot wears orange and what's he doing out here? Naruto looked around and said, this looks like the place I was told to come to. Now to learn a jutsu. As he walked over and unrolled the scroll and leaned against the cabin and began to read. Tenten inside the cabin rolled her eyes and thought, great, I wanted to be alone. Kujbunshin no Jutsu, that's a Junin level jutsu, whoa, how did he get his hands on a scroll with all those jutsu? As she looked out the window to where Naruto was sitting, and Naruto jumped up and said, alright, I think I got it, let's give it a try. As he walked a few feet away and put his hands together and said, Kujbunshin no Jutsu. As a deformed clone appeared and Naruto frowned and said, damn it, again. As he tried it over and over again. While that was going on, Tenten pulled out a scroll and a pen and began to copy what she read off the scroll Naruto left open on the ground and thought, Kage Shuriken no Jutsu and Kage Kunai no Jutsu, I could use both those with my weapons. An hour later, Tenten, who had finished copying several jutsu from the Forbidden Scroll, looked out at Naruto, who was panting, and thought, damn, and I thought Lee and Guy Sensei were stamina freaks, but at least he got that jutsu down. Just then Iruka came in the clearing and screamed, I found you, Naruto. What the hell were you thinking? Naruto looked up and said, oh hey Iruka Sensei, so I guess this is where you test me and I graduate, right? Iruka blinked as did Tenten, and Iruka said, what are you talking about, Naruto? Naruto said, the makeup test Mizuki-sensei told me about. He said if I could successfully get that scroll from the Hokage Tower and learn a jutsu from it, then I would pass. Tenten frowned and Iruka looked confused and said, Mizuki? In a questioning tone when his ears heard the sound of weapons flying, and he screamed, get down. As he covered Naruto just as a couple of weapons stabbed him in the back. Tenten's eyes were wide and she thought, the one time I don't have a weapon on me. As she began to look around out the window and saw Mizuki standing on a tree. Iruka pushed himself up and said, Mizuki, what are you doing? Why did you do this? Mizuki said, quit acting so confused, Iruka, you should already know the answer. I'm here to kill the demon behind you. The question is, why are you defending him when he killed your parents? Naruto looked confused as Tenten's eyes widened and Naruto asked, what's going on? Why did you attack Iruka-sensei, Mizuki-sensei? Mizuki said, give me the scroll, Naruto. As he held out his hand. Iruka pulled out a kunai and said, Naruto, whatever you do, don't give that scroll to Mizuki. It contains all of Konoha forbidden jutsu. Guard it with your life. Tenten's eyes widened and thought, those are forbidden jutsu. As she patted the scroll she made. Mizuki said, hey, you want to know a secret, the reason why everyone hates you, Naruto? Iruka said, no Mizuki, you know it's forbidden. Naruto asked, what are you talking about, what's forbidden? Mizuki said, 14 years ago the Kyuubi no Kitsune attacked Konoha. The Sandaime passed a law making it illegal to tell exactly what happened to the Kyuubi. The truth is the Yondaime sacrificed his life to seal the Kyuubi in a newborn baby, you. You are the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Naruto was frozen in place as he heard this, as he remembered all the whispers and glares, and Tenten's lips pursed together and thought, bullshit, even if what you said is true about the Yondaime sealing the Kyuubi, then it is only sealed, not turning him into the Kyuubi. Mizuki pulled out a demon windmill shuriken and threw it at Naruto, who was frozen when Iruka shoved him down, and Naruto looked wide-eyed and then he grabbed the scroll and took off running. Tenten saw as Mizuki and Iruka chased after the direction Naruto went, and she left the cabin and grabbed a kunai that Iruka had pulled out and dropped before she also ran in the direction the others left. When she got there, she saw Iruka and Mizuki facing each other, and Iruka said, "You're right, a demon would do that, but Naruto not a demon, he is a proud citizen of Konoha who dreams to be Hokage." Mizuki said, "Then I have no choice but to kill you first. I was going to wait until the end, but you leave me no choice." As he drew back to throw another windmill shuriken when Naruto appeared, kicking Mizuki in the face and said, "Don't you dare harm Iruka-sensei again or I'll kill you." Mizuki laughed and said, "You, kill me. You're not even fit to be a ninja. I can defeat you with one hand." Naruto gritted his teeth and said, "Bring it and I'll return what you give to me 100 times over." Kujibunshin no Jutsu. As the clearing was covered in Naruto, everyone's eyes were wide at this, and Tenten thought, "No way, there's over 100 of them, ouch, that's going to leave a mark," as she watched Naruto defeat Mizuki. Iruka, seeing this, said, "Naruto, come here, close your eyes a minute." Naruto did, and Iruka pulled off Naruto goggles and placed his hiate on Naruto head and said, "You can open them now, congratulations. You pass." Naruto smiled and said, "Just you wait, Iruka-sensei, I'll show everyone I'm me and not the Kyuubi, and someday I'll become Hokage and earn everyone respect." Iruka said, "I believe you will, Naruto. Now let's get that scroll back to the Hokage," as Naruto helped Iruka leave the clearing. Tenten, who was hiding in some bushes, smiled and thought, "I believe you will also, Naruto. If you can reach your dream, then so can I." As she looked at their retreating form before her eyes landed on Mizuki, and she flipped the kunai in her hand around and then threw it at Mizuki, hitting him in the spine, making him scream out, and thought, "That will make sure he can't get away until Anbu show up." When Tenten got home that night, her dad was sitting at the table drinking some tea and said, "You're home late, dear, is everything alright? There seemed to be a lot of activity tonight." Tenten bit her lip and walked over and sat down and asked, "Dad, earlier I was in the woods thinking when I saw a fight between a couple of ninja and a kid named Naruto. I heard some things about the Kyuubi and some law." Dustin frowned as he sat back and asked, "And?" Tenten asked, "Could you tell me what you know about it?" "I'll tell you what I heard first if you want." Dustin nods, and Tenten told him what she heard, and Dustin sighed and said, "I'm glad to see you're using your brain and not following the crowd. A lot of people are not as smart as you, and the way it sounds that Mizuki guy was one of the kids' sensei who most likely been screwing him over in the academy." Tenten said, "I'd believe it. His taijutsu had no form, his balance and moves were all wrong, his chakra control sucks, and don't get me started on the cloths." Dustin laughed and said, "Yeah, but that's probably all he could afford or was allowed to buy. I'd let him shop here, but we don't let civilians in here, so he couldn't until he became a ninja," as he got serious. Tenten frowned and said, "Dad, I don't like where my mind is going with this. I mean, if he's been screwed over already so much, what's to stop it from happening again when he gets his team?" Dustin said, "But what can you do or hope to do about it, dear? You can't tutor him because you're busy with your own duties here and as a ninja and then your personal training." Tenten sighed and said, "I know, but maybe," as she looked in thought. Dustin looked at her and asked, "Maybe what?" Tenten said, "Well, I can't tutor him, but maybe there is something I could do. The way he acted when Iruka acknowledged him and his dream makes me believe that he doesn't have very many people or any that do believe in him. I know what that feels like with people not believing in me and my dream. Maybe I can tell him that I believe in him and maybe give him a hint or two toward becoming a better ninja to work toward his dream." Dustin thought a moment and said, "All right, I'll go along with that idea, and you could even make a deal with him about getting his supplies here." Tenten smiled and said, "Thanks, Dad, but what should I give him for advice?" Dustin said, "Well, you were pretty good at pointing out his flaws you saw earlier. Why not write down how to correct those flaws so that way he can work on that?" Tenten said, "Great idea, Dad, thanks for doing this." Dustin said, "He's a good kid, he reminds me of an old friend some. as he took a sip of his tea. Tenten, who had grabbed a blank scroll and began to write down on it, asked, "Really, who?" Dustin said, "An old friend, that's all I will say." Tenten, who was writing, said, "Hey Dad, do you think we could give him a one-time discount to get him out of that kill me orange outfit?" Dustin said, "Only if he agrees to get all his equipment from us in the future. I'm not running a charity and I don't want him thinking we are either." Tenten nods and said, "Thanks," as she kept on writing. The next morning Naruto was awoke by someone knocking on his door, and he rubbed the sleep from his eyes as he opened the door in his frog boxers and wearing his black and white nightcap, and he blinked as he saw a girl about his age standing there in a Chinese shirt and said, "Can I help you?" Tenten bit her lip to keep from laughing and said, "Could I come in and could you get on some shorts? Please." Naruto blinked and looked at his cloths and frowned and said, "Sorry about that. I have not had a chance to go to the bathroom yet." Tenten blinked and then blushed as she looked down and saw what he was referring to, and Naruto turned and went toward the bathroom, leaving the door open for Tenten to come in, and Tenten frowned as she came in and closed the door as she heard the bathroom door close and said, "Are you always this forward letting people come in?" Naruto, who was in the bathroom, said through the door, "I don't get a lot of visitors, so if someone actually comes here they must have an important reason," as he flushed the toilet and grabbed a pair of his pants and slipped them on. When he came out he saw Tenten, who was looking around, and said, "So, who are you and why are you here?" Tenten said, "Oh right, my name is Tenten, my family owns the Wolf Claw weapons shop. Last night, in the woods at the cabin." Naruto frowned and Tenten said, "My family owns that cabin and I go there to relax when I want to be alone and I heard everything." Naruto closed his eyes and said, "So what are you here for? To try and kill me also?" as he sighed with a tired tone. Tenten said, "Actually, no. That Mizuki guy was full of shit. I work with sealing all the time and I know if something is sealed in something that does not make them the same thing. The reason I'm here is I wanted to tell you I understand a little about what you're going through, I mean with your dream of being Hokage. I have my own dream of proving women can be just as good as men as ninja, and not very many people believe in me or my dream, but I keep on going, trying to get better and stronger every day, working toward my goal, and I wanted to tell you that from what I saw last night that you made me believe in you and your dream also, and so I wanted to tell you that I believe in you." Naruto was shocked as he heard this and said, "Thank you, you're not just making that up, are you?" Tenten shook her head and said, "No. In fact, when I got home last night I talked with my dad to find out what he knew about what I saw and heard, and he told me he was proud of me for not being an idiot like Mizuki and knowing the difference. When you kicked Mizuki I was actually in a tree ready to help fight the bastard, and after you left I used the kunai I had to stab him in the spine to make sure he couldn't escape before Anbu arrived. After talking with Dad I made this for you," as she pulled out a scroll and handed it to Naruto. Naruto frowned and asked, "What is it?" Tenten said, "Well, when I saw how you moved during the events and when I was watching you practice the Kujbunshin no Jutsu from the cabin, I saw a couple of areas I thought that you could improve a little bit on, and so I wrote down things that I know are ways to correct them, like chakra control and a few other things. Also, you had left the scroll open when you were practicing and I read and copied the first 3 jutsu from it and I included them on that scroll for you. I saw something that could help you really quick and I underlined it as part of the Kujbunshin no Jutsu description." Naruto, who had took the scroll and began to read it, said, "Anything they learn is transferred back to the original." Tenten said, "Yeah, I figured that could help you get your chakra control under control quicker. Also Dad and I talked and he said that when you were a civilian you couldn't come in our store because we only sell to shinobi, because we didn't want kids coming in and getting hurt on the weapons, but we would like to make a deal with you. If you agree to use our family shop to get all your future equipment, we would give you a one-time discount on your equipment to help you get started now that you're a fellow shinobi of Konoha. It isn't charity or a gift. It's just we want you to be a proud ninja and not someone who people will make fun of. We want you to show everyone you are you and not Kyuubi, so no more kill me orange." Naruto rolled up the scroll and looked at Tenten and asked, Why are you doing this? Tenten said, because I want both of us to show the world who we really are and both of us to complete our dreams. Well, that is all I came here for. I've sealed 2 books, one on sealing and the other on chakra control theories in those 2 seals on the bottom. All you have to do is add chakra and they will pop out. Now I have to get going to meet my team for training, and even if you don't accept this, I still wish you luck, as she got up and started toward the door. Naruto said, Wait, thank you. You don't know how much this means to me, and also the fact you accept me for me. Can we be friends? Tenten smiled and said, I'd like that. Naruto smiled and said, Well, good luck, Tenten, and I hope to see you again sometime, and I hope you reach your dream. Tenten said, Same to you, Naruto. Good luck, as she quickly left. Naruto thought, things are starting to get better and better. After Tenten left, Naruto read over the scroll several times and thought, she put a lot of time and effort into this. I can see how well she thought over it. Took 20 minutes, but Naruto found the wolf claw weapons shop and entered the store, and as the bell rang above the door he looked around and a man came from the back, and when he saw Naruto he said, I see Tenten must have met you. I'm Dustin. Naruto smiled slightly as he saw Dustin being friendly, and he said, Naruto Uzumaki. Dustin laughed as he said, I know, several of your reputations precede you, including being the prankmaster from hell. I love the Hokage monument paint job you did. I hear Anbu got there chewed up over that one since nobody saw you until you were nearly done. Naruto laughed and said, Yeah, I still can't figure out how I was able to avoid all those ninja until Iruka-sensei found me, so anyways, I'm not sure what to get or where to get started, and I don't have very much money. As he pulled out his wallet. Dustin said, Let's start off with your cloths and go from there, and we will work something out on the payment if you don't have enough. Now let's see, can you take off your coat so I can take your measurements, and then we can get started on getting you some new cloths. Naruto took off his orange coat and Dustin grabbed a tailor's tape and began to take Naruto measurements, and after he was done he said, a little short right now and a little thin, but you're still growing. Let's see. Bright colors are not the best for a ninja, but also too dark of colors isn't best either. Let's see. Here we go. As he pulled out a pair of black pants and then walked over and grabbed a gray shirt and some fishnet shirt before he walked over to another rack and grabbed a black cloak, and he said, Now let's see. Yeah, this should work. Why don't you go try this on and let's see how you look? As he handed the cloths to Naruto. Naruto took them and Dustin pointed to a dressing room and Naruto went in and put the cloths on. When Naruto came back out, Dustin said, Try the cloak on. Naruto frowned as he grabbed the cloak and put it on and said, I'm not used to wearing a cloak like this. Dustin said, I know and I can tell, but I mostly wanted to see something. Walk down the aisle there and come back and let me see if I am right. Naruto did and Dustin said, I see, you're right, a cloak like that one won't work for you because of your current height, but when you get older it most likely will once you get your growth spurt. I figure you will shoot up to around 6 foot tall. Anyways, the thing I wanted to see was how you carried yourself. You're used to running a lot and a cloak would get tangled up with your legs and trip you. I can tell by your measurements and your movements that when you fight most of the time you take a lot more damage because of your arms and legs being shorter than the person you're fighting, right? Naruto nods and Dustin said, that means any taijutsu style you're going to learn is going to have to be high speed and built around dodging. I would say your best bet is to make it where your enemies have to dodge your blows instead of you having to dodge theirs. To do this I would suggest getting a weapon to extend your range, and I mean something bigger than a kunai, because if your enemy has kunais then you're right back where you started. Naruto thought about it and asked, what do you suggest then? Dustin said, well, first go ahead and take off that cloak. I already saw what I needed to see from using it, now let's see, maybe. As he looked at Naruto and then walked back to the counter and pulled out a drawer and grabbed a piece of paper and came back to Naruto and said, do me a favor and send some chakra into this. It will help me get the perfect weapon for you. Naruto asked. How? As he sent chakra into the paper and the paper split down the middle. Dustin said. So I was right, wind. And Naruto asked, huh? Dustin said. Oh sorry, this chakra tells what elemental affinity you have, which means what kind of jutsu are easier for you to do than others. Wind cuts, fire burns, water soaks, earth crumbles, and lightning crinkles. Yours cuts, so that means you have wind as your elemental affinity. It's rare in Konoha actually, but an old friend of mine in Wind Country also uses wind and gave me a few things over the years to sell here, and he gave me a few wind jutsu to help promote the sales of the weapons he sent to me he made. I hate the fact that it's his weapons that suit you instead of mine, but that's fine. Not let me see what we got. As he moved over to a section of weapons and he looked at Naruto and said, yeah, that should work. Naruto asked, what should work? Whoa, don't you think that's I don't know, too long? As he looked at the weapon Dustin picked up and noticed the weapon was over 6 feet tall and had a blade on one end of a long staff before on the other end there was a half-moon flat piece of metal. Dustin laughed and said, normally you would be right, except this isn't a normal weapon or even one weapon but several weapons. You see that half-moon on the end? It is designed like a Suna battle fan, and it allows you to use wind manipulation to send blades of wind and strong gust of winds out of it at your enemies without the use of hand signs. Now on the other end here you have Woldo. It is a one-sided blade similar to a sword, and like the battle fan it can also send wind attacks out of it or make it sharper and longer with wind chakra. Now we have the staff here, watch. As he grabbed the staff and twisted each end and the staff came separate, and Dustin said, as you can see, this can become 2 weapons at the same time, or you can do this. As he placed both ends of the weapon together and said, as you can see, the battle fan and the Woldo are designed with a small groove that allows them to join together to make a battle pike, and the 2 handles merge together as well to make one handle. Now watch this. This is where my friend made the ultimate surprise. As he grabbed the handle near the pike and pulled it off, leaving a 3-foot staff and a foot-long staff on the pike, and said, here is a battle axe that you can carry around and a staff weapon. What do you think? Naruto was wide-eyed and said, whoa, that is awesome, but all the time putting it together and taking it apart seems to me like it would be dangerous. Dustin smirked and said, excellent, I would have hit you over the head with this if you had actually accepted this weapon. This weapon is good, but more along the lines a samurai would use. You're not a samurai but a ninja. You don't have time to put together and take apart this in battle. I keep it here because it was the last piece of work my friend gave me before he passed away, and it's a reminder about putting too much work into any one weapon. A weapon, no matter how well made it is or how deadly it is only as effective as the person who wields it. Nobody can actually wield this weapon correctly even though it is so deadly. Naruto frowned and asked, then why did you pick it out and show me it? Dustin said, because you needed to understand the different types of weapons that you could use as a wind user, and understand just because you can use a weapon doesn't mean you should use a weapon. Kunais and shurikens are cheap and inexpensive weapons that don't take much skill to use and are not really considered a weapon but more of basic tools. A weapon, however, is something you bond with and take time learning and taking care of. It becomes a part of you. Now catch. As he tossed Naruto a scroll. Naruto asked, what's this? Dustin said, that scroll contains what I figure is the best weapon for you right now. It's a basic ninjata sword that allows a person with wind chakra to use it and train in the use of wind chakra without destroying the weapon. It's actually a mass-produced weapon that is common, but the reason I am saying that is your best choice is you need to learn to wield a weapon and figure out what you can and can't do, so that way when you find a weapon that you prefer, it is a weapon that is a part of you. Sometimes you can find one and other times you have to make one yourself. Do you understand? Naruto asked. Is this what you were saying about a person bonding with a weapon? Dustin nods and said, when you find your weapon you will know what I mean. It's not something other can do for you, but you have to live long enough to find your weapon, and that is why I am giving you that ninjata. Naruto frowned and after a moment smirked and said, I think I understand. It's not being what I am but who I am that determines my weapon. Dustin said. Very good. Most people don't understand that and think that just because they're a ninja they need this or that kind of weapon and it ends up getting them killed. There's an old saying, a user doesn't pick the weapon picks its user. I am a firm believer in this. Naruto smiled and said, I can see why Tenten's so smart. Dustin laughed and said, no, she got that from her mother. Anyways, let's get you finished up. Go grab you a coat over there off the rack to wear over your normal cloths and I'll get you 3 more sets of the rest of the cloths I got you. Naruto nods and he grabs a gray coat that slowly moves into a light blue and puts it on, and Dustin had a scroll and said, alright, here you go. Here is a total of 4 sets of cloths including the one you got on, the ninjata, the coat, 2 sets of shurikens and kunai, a sealing kit along with some scrolls so that way in case you decide to try it out like Tenten suggested you will have the supplies. I have also included a first aid kit and a scroll with 5 wind jutsu and wind manipulation training to help you with that and some weights. Is there anything else you need? Naruto shook his head and Dustin said, that will be a total of $960. Naruto was wide-eyed as he pulled out his money and said, I only got $600. Dustin said, normally this would have cost you $1,200, so I gave you a discount and I figured you would be short, so pay half now and once a month I expect you to come pay part of the rest of your balance until it's paid off. Deal? Naruto said, deal, so I owe you $480. Dustin nods and Naruto handed him the money and said, thanks. Dustin said, no problem, now you better get going. I mean, you can't stay here all day talking to an old man like me if you want to get stronger. Naruto laughed and said, I guess not, but thank you and I'll be sure to pay you. Dustin said, I believe you will, kid. Naruto said, well, CYA. As he left. Naruto left and went to the woods behind the Hokage monument and opened the scroll and thought, looks like the same seal as the other scroll, so here goes. As he sent chakra into each of the seals on the scroll, unsealing the items. Naruto smiled and picked up the weights and thought, let's see, chakra weights, send chakra to the seal on each band and a number will appear and will stop adding at 50 pounds each. Release the weights by putting blood on the one marked right arm. Sounds simple enough. As he put one on both his arms and one on both his legs and began to send chakra into them and saw them get to 10 pounds, and Naruto thought, that should do it for now. Naruto then looked at the other things and resealed everything except the scroll on wind jutsu and thought, well, I guess it's time to see if Kajbunshians really do transfer back their memories. And then he unsealed the sword and the 2 books and put his hands together and said, Kajbunshin no Jutsu. As 20 Kage-bunshin appeared and Naruto said, alright, I want you to work on that leaf balancing, you will work on the tree climbing, you go find some water and try the water walking, you start reading the book on seals, you start reading the book on chakra control theories, and let's see. It says here that in order to learn to control our wind chakra we have to fold our chakra in half and use the thin edge of our chakra to cut leaves, stones, and water. Okay, you 3 go and figure out amongst yourself which one you want to try. Now let's see, that leaves me 12 more of you guys. I got the Kage Kunai no Jutsu and the Kage Shuriken no Jutsu to learn, and also these 5 wind jutsu. I want you 2 to take a kunai and a shuriken and do as the scroll said, trying those 2 jutsu, and I want you 5 to work on of the wind jutsu. Okay, that leaves me with 5 more. Why doesn't Gigi do this with his paperwork if this works? Alright, you 5 go work on chakra control, I don't care which, but go. A Kage-bunshin asked, what are you going to do? Naruto said, well, I thought I would get used to these weights since I feel sluggish and try to also figure out how to swing this sword around. A Kage-bunshin asked, but I thought we were going to do the dodging thingy. Naruto frowned and said, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Well, I don't have enough money to buy some rubber balls since I still need to eat until I get paid again. A Kage-bunshin asked, why not use sticks and rocks? It's not like we haven't been hit with them before. Naruto thought a moment and said, Alright, instead of chakra control, you 5 go find some rocks and come back and we will try the dodging thing while I swing this thing. The Kajbunshin said, hi. And all of them left. Naruto was reaching for the sword when the Kajbunshin working on tree climbing fell back and exploded, and Naruto blinked as did all the Kajbunshin, and he said, well, that works. Kajbunshin no jutsu. As 15 more Kajbunshin appeared and he frowned and said, alright, divide into 3 teams and go work on one of the chakra control exercises, as he reached for his sword. A Kajbunshin said, why should we listen to you? Naruto said, because I'm the original and you're just a clone. The Kajbunshin gave him a raspberry before it was stuck with Naruto's sword, and Naruto asked, anyone else want to die? One said, that was mean, boss. Naruto sighed and said, I'm going to go crazy. Look, just do what I told you to already. The clones quickly left, and a few seconds later Naruto got the memories of one of them and thought, this is going to be a long day. Before he was hit in the head by a rock and he screamed, ow. A Kajbunshin said, sorry boss, but you're supposed to dodge. Naruto flipped him off and said, warn me next time. A Kajbunshin screamed, dodge. Having already thrown a rock, and Naruto got hit in the back of the head. Naruto growled and one said, ready boss. Naruto said, yeah. Just then he was hit in the back and he said, hey, I wasn't ready. One said, boss, you said you were. Naruto slapped his head and said, alright, look, let's start with dodging in front of me for now, alright. The 5 Kajbunshin got together and drew back and asked, ready. Naruto nods and he dodged the first rock only to get hit by 4 more, and he muttered, ow, before he got back up and started again. Several hours later Naruto was limping back into the village covered in bruises and blood, and Iruka, who was walking by, asked, Naruto, is that you? Naruto looked at him and nods, and Iruka asked, what happened to you? Who did this? Naruto rubbed his ribs and said, I got in a fight with myself and lost. Iruka looked confused and asked, huh? What are you talking about? Just then a Kajbunshin came running up behind Naruto and said, hey boss, you forgot this, as he held up a scroll. Naruto reached for the scroll and the Kajbunshin said, sorry boss, but you told us to throw as hard as we could. Naruto looked at him and kicked him in the nuts, and he winces as he got the memories and said, note to self, don't kick nuts on Kajbunshin. OWW. As he bent over. Iruka blinked and said, are you going to be alright, Naruto? Naruto fell to the ground and said, no, I'm dying. As he curled up into a fetal position. Iruka's sweat dropped and put his hand on Naruto's shoulder and shushined away to Naruto's apartment, and Naruto opened his eyes and said, thanks. I think I know why that jutsu is a forbidden jutsu. Iruka asked, oh. Why is that? Naruto said, Kajbunshin get their own personalities, mine are all smart. A Kajbunshin stuck its head out of the kitchen holding a cup of ramen and said, I'd rather be a smart than a dumb like you. Naruto growled and sat up and said, what the hell are you doing here? I thought you all were dispelled. The Kajbunshin said, nope, I got hungry looking for some water and so I decided to come back home and eat. Naruto said, damn it, stay out of my ramen. As he got up and limped into the kitchen and swung at the Kajbunshin, who dodged and stuck out his tongue before dropping his fork on his foot, dispelling itself. Naruto blinked and said, damn it, he ate 5 cups of my ramen. Iruka's sweat dropped and thought, I am not even going to ask, as he shushined away. The next day Naruto walked into the Hokage office in his new cloths with his sword on his back, and the Sandaime blinked as he saw Naruto and asked, Naruto, is that really you? Naruto slapped his head and said, do you want me to release Kyuubi to prove it? Damn it, I just got new cloths, does everyone have to ask that? Sarutobi said, sorry Naruto, it's just surprising. So what are you here for? Naruto held up his hand and said, ninja registration and picture ID. Sarutobi chuckled sheepishly and said, I see, not bad. Oh, why do you say you're a wind type? Naruto said, Because I am. That strange paper split down the middle and said I was wind chakra. Sarutobi said, chakra papers, where did you come in contact with that? Naruto rubbed his head and said, the store I got these cloths at, the Wolf Claw weapon shop. Dustin had me try it to see what element I had to help me pick a weapon. Sarutobi said, and you got a ninjata. Naruto said, well, for now at least. He said this could handle my wind chakra and help me train in it, but I would have to find my true weapon, but this would help keep me alive until I do find it. Sarutobi chuckled and said, yes, that does sound like him. So what all have you been doing besides getting new cloths and a sword? Naruto rubbed his head and said, training. I was wondering, do you have anything on seals or chakra theories? Sarutobi blinked and asked, why? Naruto said, promise me you won't do anything or punish anyone, please. Sarutobi frowned and said, depends on what's going on, Naruto. Naruto sighed and said, you know a girl named Tenten, Dustin's daughter. Sarutobi nods and Naruto said, well, when Mizuki attacked Iruka and me, there was an old cabin there and Tenten was sort of inside it. She said her family owns it and she goes there to be alone and she sort of saw and heard everything. Sarutobi frowned and thought, well, that probably explains the kunai to the spine, and asked, and? Naruto said, she accepted me, she came by my place and told me that she knows the difference between me and the fox and we sort of became friends and she told me she believed in me and my dream of someday becoming Hokage and she made a scroll to help me. Sarutobi said, I see, may I see what she wrote? Naruto pulled out a scroll and Sarutobi opened it and read and blinked and said, she put a lot of time and work into this, but how did she get those 3 jutsu? Naruto said, that's sort of my fault. After I read how to do the Kujbunshin no Jutsu, I got up and started to work on it and she got curious as to what was in the scroll and she was able to see those 3 jutsu and copied them down. Please don't punish her or blame her. Blame me if you have to, because she didn't know they were forbidden jutsu at the time and thought they were just a training scroll. Sarutobi bit his lip and said, very well, but I will have to tell her not to teach those to anyone else. Naruto said, alright, but please don't do anything to her because she's the first real friend I've ever had and she believes in me and accepts me. Sarutobi sat back and said, I won't, Naruto. Now why do you want to know more about chakra theories and seals? Naruto smiled and said, well, I sort of went training happy with my Kujbunshin yesterday and worked on everything including reading those books and I found out a lot about both that I never knew before. Did you know that you can do jutsu without hand signs and hand signs are only an aid to help in shaping and molding the chakra for jutsu? Sarutobi said, indeed I did know that. Naruto said, oh yeah, did you know that you can seal a fart in a storage scroll and make it a stink bomb? Sarutobi blinked and said, actually, no I didn't, how did you know that? Naruto looked sheepish and said, my Kujbunshin after he read the book on seals decided to try and create a storage scroll and he messed up on the seal a little and came to show me when I was, answering nature's call and he accidentally sealed my fart into the scroll. I grabbed that scroll by mistake this morning and right now I'm having to air out my apartment. Sarutobi started to laugh and said, oh my, only you could do something like that, Naruto, so why are you wanting those books? Naruto frowned and said, well, when was the last time my seal was inspected? Sarutobi frowned and asked, why? Naruto said, I read about seals and how they can degrade over time with use and I don't remember ever having it checked to see if it's degrading and see if there's a chance Kyuubi could break free. Sarutobi said, about a year ago. I had came by your apartment when you were asleep and used a sleeping jutsu on you to make sure you wouldn't wake up and checked it. Naruto nods and said, I understand and thanks but. I realize that I have a big responsibility to not only myself but everyone else, protecting them from Kyuubi. I figure the best thing I can do is learn about seals and how to maintain them should this one start to degrade, as well as in case it is ever damaged, like someone cuts me across my stomach. If I knew more about seals, I could know if there was a danger of Kyuubi escaping, and if so, I could get as far away from Konoha as I can before the seal collapsed to at least give the people more of a chance to prepare in case it decided to come back and finish what it started. Sarutobi looked at Naruto and asked, "Are you planning to mess with the seal?" Naruto said, "Only to ensure that Kyuubi doesn't get free. I've read enough warnings to know that if the seal fails, there are several possibilities, but all of them agree that I would die, and I personally don't plan to die until I am older than you." Sarutobi bit his lip and said, "Naruto, you have made several well thought out points, and I commend you on realizing what could happen. I will agree to give you access to more books on sealing, but only on two conditions. The first is you do not do anything to the Kyuubi seal unless you have my permission first, and only if I agree to it. The second is you will be tested every so often by Konoha Seal Master, Jiraiya of the Sanins, who will also help in your study of seals. Do you understand?" Naruto nods and Sarutobi said, "Very well." As he got up and grabbed two books and came back over and said, "This is the next book in the series the book you already read came from. I will not help you until you can demonstrate that you can use every seal in this book and the one you already have without any mistakes." Naruto smiles and said, "Thanks, Gigi." Sarutobi said, "This second book, Naruto, is one that was wrote by the Yondaime Hokage on the theories of chakra manipulation. You must not let anyone else read this book, as it's not supposed to ever leave this office. Do you understand?" Naruto said, "I understand, but if it's so valuable, why are you giving it to me?" Sarutobi said, "Call it an investment for the future. With both books on chakra theories, you should have enough knowledge to create your own jutsu, and I mean a real jutsu and not an advanced henge like your no jutsu." Naruto, who had opened his mouth, closed it and said, "All right, Gigi, I'll create my own jutsu." Sarutobi said, "Good. Now, like Tenten, I don't want you teaching those jutsu to anyone else, Naruto." Naruto said, "I won't, I promise." Sarutobi said, "Is there anything else you need to tell me?" Naruto said, "I was thinking of telling you to use Kagebunshin to do your paperwork since the memories transfer back to you, but I don't know if it was just me or what, but mine were a little, they were, unique in personality." Sarutobi said, "I'll consider it, but thanks for the advice." Naruto said, "Thank Tenten, I missed reading that important note when I learned the jutsu, and it would have taken me a while to realize the truth." Sarutobi said, "Well, it's been nice talking with you, Naruto, but I must get back to my duties." Naruto nods and gets up and starts toward the door, but stopped and said, "Gigi, could you not tell anyone about all this? I want to surprise everyone with my improved skills, but until I can actually use them, I don't want people making fun of me." Sarutobi said, "This will remain our little secret." Naruto smiles and reached for the door and said, "Gigi, I figured it out last night after reading up on seals. I notice one seal in the center of the Kyuubi seal just by chance. A blood seal. The only way that I should have been able to use Kyuubi chakra ever was if a blood relative were to make that seal. I thought it over and remember the picture on the wall here in this office. I finally understand why he did it, and I understand why you hide it. But someday, could you tell me about my mother?" As his smile faded and he kept his hand on the door with his back to the Sandaime while trying to keep from losing his control. Sarutobi looked out the window and said, "There are many secrets I carry that nobody knows. There are those secrets that can only be learned by becoming a chunin, and others when a person makes junin. You're dismissed." Naruto closed his eyes and thought, "So I was right." As he opened the door and began to walk out when a kid shouted, "I got you this time, old man," and stabbed at Naruto, who was coming out the door with a wooden kunai. Sarutobi blinked and groaned, and Naruto growled and said, "What the hell, you little brat?" Sarutobi said, "Konohamaru, that is the third time this week you have tried to surprise attack me." The newly identified Konohamaru said, "So you realize the danger I present to you, old man, and hired a bodyguard, huh?" Naruto slapped his hand upside the back of Konohamaru's head, knocking him to the ground, and said, "You idiot, Gigi doesn't need a bodyguard because he's the strongest ninja in the village, and you're just some snot-nosed little brat." The only way that you would stand a chance at defeating him is if you had a team to do it or if you found his weakness. Konohamaru said. Oh yeah, and what do you know, you jerk? Naruto growled said. Watch this. As he turned, putting his hands together, and Sarutobi seeing this thought, oh no. And Naruto shouted, no jutsu, as he transformed into a blonde woman. The sound of a thud was heard, making both Naruto and Konohamaru look over and saw the Sandaime was passed out with blood coming from his nose, and Konohamaru was wide-eyed and said, Grandpa. As he ran over and tapped Sarutobi on the face and looked at Naruto and said, you killed him, you're the Hokage now. Naruto changed back and said, idiot, he's just passed out because he's a pervert. That is his weakness. A groan was heard and Sarutobi rubbed his head and wiped the blood off his face and said, no jutsu, very dangerous kinjutsu, don't do it again. Naruto laughed and said, hey, I just thought of another jutsu, Gigi. It won't work for our deal, but I think you will like it. Harem jutsu. As the room was filled with blonde girls, Sarutobi passed out again and Konohamaru was wide-eyed and said, you have got to teach me that. Naruto snorts as he released the jutsu and said, no, now go away, brat. As he turned and started to walk away. At that moment Ebisu walked into the room and shouted, honorable grandson. Oh my, what have you done to the Hokage, honorable grandson? As he moved over to wake up the Sandaime. Konohamaru looked at where Naruto had went and thought, I don't know who you are, but I'm going to learn how you did that and defeat Gramps and you. After the Sandaime was up and Konohamaru was gone, the Sandaime thought, I'm sorry Naruto, but you're not ready. That afternoon Naruto was dodging rocks his Kage Bunshin were throwing at him as other ones were doing the same exercises from the day before and also reading the 2 new books when a voice said, you know, I didn't think you would get this serious about your training. Causing Naruto to look up and see Tenten standing on a tree limb and said, oh hey OWW, damn it, stop throwing a minute, so what are you doing here and how did you find me, Tenten? Tenten jumped down out of the tree and said, well, the Sandaime told me you usually train up here after he had a little talk with me. As she shot him a glare. Naruto saw this and asked, he didn't punish you or anything, did he? Tenten said, no, but he could have, because some of the things I trusted you with were secrets that you're not supposed to learn until after you actually become genin. Naruto said, but I am one. Tenten shook her head and said, no, not yet. There's another test that is given by your Junin sensei to see if you are ready to be one. The test at the academy is just to see if you might be ready. Naruto frowned and said, I didn't know and I'm sorry if I got you in trouble, but. Tenten said, but what? Why did you go see him and tell him about me? As she placed her hands on her hips. Naruto sighed and said, I finished those 2 books you gave me and I learned a lot of things I didn't know, some of which scared me, like the fact seals degrade over time with use. I was worried about. You know, I never remembered it being checked to see if it had been degrading, so I had to ask about it so I can at least know it's not going to burst out of my stomach and kill me because nobody checking on it. Tenten frowned and said, alright, I can understand why you went to talk to him, but you still didn't explain why you mentioned me. Naruto rubbed his head and said, well, I had to tell him how I knew what I knew so far and why I was asking for some more advanced books on both sealing and chakra theories, and he was worried I might be messing with the seal, and so I had no choice but to tell him, and I begged him not to be angry at you or punish you because you didn't know those jutsu were forbidden and thought they were just training scrolls. I told him if he had to punish anyone to punish me. He told me he wouldn't, but he would tell you not to teach those jutsu to anyone else and made me promise not to also. I'm sorry, I didn't plan to tell him about you, but he's like a grandpa to me and I can't lie to him after everything he's done for me. Even if I don't agree with some of the things, I at least understand and respect him for trying. As he looked down. Tenten sighed and said, well, you can't run off and tell him everything all the time. Friends keep secrets for each other. I'm keeping your secret even if there is a law about it, and I will keep any other secrets you want to tell me, but you can't just go and tell others about the secrets I tell you. Training is considered a secret because I don't want others to know how I do my jutsu or how I fight and prepare for it, and I don't think you would either, so any more training between us we don't tell unless we ask each other's permission first from now on, agreed. Naruto nods and said, yeah, and I'm sorry. Tenten waved it off and said, so you already finished both those books, huh? Looking over at the clones who were reading. Naruto's eyes got big with excitement and said, yeah, and I learned some new stuff they never even talked about back in the academy. Gigi told me he will let me have more advanced books on sealing once I can show I understand those 2 books on sealing, and he also is going to have some guy named Jiraiya test me and help me with seals sometime. Tenten's eyes got wide and said, you're going to get trained by Jiraiya-sama of the Sanins. Naruto rubbed his head and said, yeah. Gigi also said that with the 2 books I got on chakra theories I will have enough knowledge to make my own jutsu and not one of my pervert jutsu. He said once I make my own jutsu he will give me more advanced books on those. Tenten said, really? What's a pervert jutsu? Naruto looked sheepish and said, it's how I got the forbidden scroll in the first place. It's a jutsu I made to knock out perverts and I used it on Gigi. Tenten frowned and asked, Naruto, why did believe that Mizuki guy when he told you about the makeup test? Didn't you think it seemed odd stealing a scroll from the Hokage tower? Naruto said, yeah, I did. Tenten asked, then why did you do it? Naruto looked down and said, Mizuki told me there were special cases where students have some kind of disability that prevents them from passing the final test. He told me some kid named Rock Lee passed a test last year and he couldn't even use chakra, and he told me about this girl named Amelia that graduated 3 years ago and she didn't have a real left arm because she lost it in the Kyuubi attack as a baby and had a wooden arm. He told me that he believed that something was wrong with my chakra that was keeping me from passing, and so he asked Iruka sensei if he could give me the alternate test. How was I supposed to know it was all a lie when I remember kids making fun of the Rock Lee kid last year and he was my sensei? Tenten bit her lip and said, I guess I can understand now why you did it. Hell, even I would have fallen for that because I know Lee since he's my teammate. Naruto's eyes were wide and he said, he is, how is he able to be a ninja when he can't use chakra? In a questioning tone. Tenten said, well, there are other things besides ninjutsu and genjutsu that you can do as a ninja. Lee is working hard to become a ninja in taijutsu, and I'll tell you this, he's actually better than most ninja I know. The only person I think could beat him is Neji-kun, our other teammate, but sensei never lets them finish their spars. Naruto said, so he's using taijutsu, has he thought about kenjutsu also? I mean Tenten laughed and said, I know what you're thinking. Remember how I told you about not going more than half your body weight on the weights? Lee can't use a weapon effectively because he bulked up on weights and has restricted his body's natural flexibility. You and Lee are like 2 sides of the same coin. His arms and legs are longer than yours, so he's more suited for taijutsu, but he sacrifices some flexibility for it. Your arms and legs are shorter, but you seem to be more flexible than him, which is why I suggested kenjutsu. Naruto said, yeah, I guess that makes sense. As he began to chuckle. Tenten asked, what's so funny? Naruto said, oh sorry, I was just laughing because I've learned more from you in a couple of days than I did in all my years at the academy. Damn it, that was my last clone working on tree climbing. Tenten looked around and said, how much are you actually working on at a time? Naruto said, everything. Why? Tenten frowned and said, so you're doing all those exercises at once? Naruto said, yeah, I haven't gotten anywhere on the wind stuff yet, but I've got the leaf balancing partially done and the tree climbing I've made it about 6 feet off the ground, and water walking I haven't made any progress yet. Tenten slapped her head and said, listen Naruto, you're going to have to learn to do things smarter, not stronger. Watch. As she walked over and placed one foot on a tree and kept it there and said, do you see what I am doing? I could go up this tree in a hurry and fall down 1,000 times trying to learn to walk up it, but instead what I am doing is going one step at a time, letting my chakra get the right amount where I am stuck to the tree good so I can do this. As she moved her foot on the ground to the tree and said, slowly, one step at a time, this isn't a race but a goal. It doesn't matter if you're first getting it as long as you do get it. Naruto blinked and said, so if I just need to take my time and learn to get up the tree then why do I need to work on my control so much? Tenten said, because the more chakra you use the more you will make later. What I've found is best is start with one tree. When you can walk up and down the tree on every branch that is at least as big as your wrist, top and bottom of the branch, then you have learned that tree and it is time to move to another tree. Each tree is different and provide a little bit of difficulty that you will have to learn to adapt to and improve on. Naruto asked, will that work with the water walking as well? Tenten said, yes, start off with water in like a pond where the water isn't moving, one step at a time making sure you adjust and get it slowly, then move up to a small stream, then a river, and then a hot spring, and if you get the chance the ocean. Naruto said, so start doing things smarter, not harder. Tenten smiled and said, exactly. Naruto frowned and said, you keep doing all this for me and helping me but I don't have any way to help you or pay you back. Don't friends supposed to help each other? Tenten said, yeah, I noticed that you're using a ninjata, maybe you could help me with being my sparring partner. Naruto asked, you use weapons? Tenten laughed and said, yeah, I carry all my weapons in scrolls. I mostly throw weapons and I've gotten so good at hitting my targets I never miss. Naruto thought a moment and asked, how good are you on moving targets? Tenten said, I never miss. Naruto smirked and said, I got an idea, you say you never miss and you also say I need to work on my dodging right. Tenten frowned and nodded slowly and Naruto said, well why not use me as your target or not me exactly but my Kujbunshin. Tenten frowned and said, but that is just a waste of time because your Kujbunshin don't help you physically get better. Naruto said, I know but you see, my Kujbunshin have been beating the hell out of me with rocks as I try to learn to dodge them and my biggest problem is I don't detect them in time to dodge. Maybe by having them be your targets they can help me learn to detect flying weapons so I can become better at dodging. Tenten thought a moment and said, maybe that will work. As she thought it over when Naruto shouted, OWW, damn it, what the hell was that for? As he rubbed the side of his head where a rock hit him. A Kujbunshin said, hey, we don't like being used as target practice any more than you do. Naruto frowned and said, but you're just Kujbunshins. The Kujbunshin said, so, we can still kick your like we did yesterday. Naruto glared at him and Tenten said, do you always fight with yourself? Naruto said, seems like it lately, I think this is why it's a forbidden jutsu. Anyways I'm the boss and you guys are going to listen to me, if Tenten wants to use you as target practice then you're going to be targets, got me? Another rock beamed him upside the head and the clone who threw it said, yes sir. Before it smirked and said, oh Tenten, just be sure to aim at our nuts please. Naruto eyes went wide and said, no. Please, not that. Tenten looked confused and asked, why? Naruto rubbed his head and said, I kicked on of my clones there yesterday and when they say they transfer back the memories it's not just the actual memories but also the pain in the memories of being hit. I felt like I was kicked in the nuts when the clone went up in smoke so please, don't hit them there. Tenten said, alright, I won't, so anyways, what's this pervert jutsu you were talking about? As she tried to get back her sanity from seeing Naruto argue with himself. Naruto put his hands together and said, no jutsu. As he was covered in smoke and when it showed his female form with clouds covering her and crotch Tenten got a tick and Naruto released the jutsu and said, pretty good huh? Tenten glared at him and said, why in the hell did you do that? Naruto asked, huh? Seeing her angry face. Tenten said, do you have any idea how demeaning that was to woman? Naruto frowned and said, what do you mean? Tenten slapped him across the face and said, you pervert. As she turned and started to leave and Naruto who was holding his face said, wait, What are you upset about? Looking confused. Tenten turned and said, you know what I'm talking about. You made that jutsu to show that women are only objects and is an insult to every woman out there. Naruto said, no I didn't, I made that jutsu to help women. Tenten screamed, help, help, how the hell can that jutsu help woman? Naruto said, by letting a shinobi be back up on a kunoichi only mission. Tenten blinked and asked, what do you mean? As she tried to calm her temper and looked at Naruto questioningly. Naruto sighed and said, Mrs. Sudi. She used to be Gigi's secretary and she would always keep little candies in her desk for whenever I came to Gigi so I could have one. She was one of the few who was always nice to me until last year when something happened on a mission with her daughter. I don't know all the details about what happened, but I came by one day and she wasn't at her desk, so I went to Gigi's door and was about to knock when I heard her screaming at Gigi from the other side of the door. She came out of his office crying and she walked over to her desk and started gathering her things and I saw how upset she was, so I walked over and asked what was wrong. She told me that her daughter was dead because her teammates couldn't get to her in time because they were men. I didn't understand what she was getting at, so I went to talk to Gigi after she left. He looked at me with such sad eyes and told me that there are times where kunoichi have to take parts of the mission where only a woman could do the job. I asked Gigi why couldn't a shinobi just use henge to pretend to be a woman and do it if it was so dangerous, and he told me that he wished a henge could do that but a henge wasn't real. I thought that was stupid, so I started playing around with the henge and I accidentally found a way to make what Gigi calls an advanced henge that is an actual shapeshift. I'm still working on it since I don't know enough about women to make it completely real, but I'm getting better at it because I plan when I become Hokage to make it where all shinobi have to learn it, so that way there won't be a such thing as kunoichi only missions, so no one else would have to cry like Mrs. Sudi. Tenten frowned as she heard this and said, so you're saying that what you showed me wasn't a regular henge but an actual shapeshift? Naruto nods and said, yeah, watch. No jutsu. As he changed again and said, see, pull my hair. Tenten walked over and pulled his hair and Naruto winced and Tenten's eyes widened as she looked at Naruto and said, why is it those clouds are staying in those areas? Naruto rubbed his head and released the jutsu and said, well, like I said, I don't know enough to make it complete yet, so I'm just using what I saw of a picture of a woman in the book in Gigi's desk one time. Tenten frowned as she heard this and started to walk a few steps and turned as she went over what she just heard and began to pace back and forward and said, okay, I can understand where you're coming from in some aspects and I'm touched that you're actually trying to come up with something like that, but I don't condone the way you are using what you do have so far. Why are you acting like a tease like that and making women seem like toys? Naruto frowned and said, I didn't know I was. I thought I was showing people my work on the jutsu so when I become Hokage they will know the jutsu works. Tenten asked, how couldn't you know it works? I mean, the way you moved your face and body was the actions of a tramp. Naruto said, but it was what the woman in Gigi's book did to get men's attention. Tenten groaned and said, no way are you that innocent, are you? As she looked at Naruto questioningly and asked, Naruto, what the difference between men and women? Naruto blinked and said, oh, that's easy, women have babies. Tenten asked, and? Naruto asked, and what? Tenten asked, what are Naruto? As she blushed slightly. Naruto said, I know it's where babies get milk since I saw a woman feeding a baby once when another lady opened a door before she closed it quickly. Tenten slumped against a tree and said, didn't they teach you about in the academy, Naruto? Naruto frowned and said, I was sent into the hall by Mizuki. Tenten thought, that's it, I'm killing the bastard next time I see him. And said, Naruto, there are a lot more things that are different between men and women than just babies. I think I have a good idea of what kind of book you were reading to get your info, and I want you to stop using it for your work. In fact, until you have gotten a book on human anatomy and memorized both males and females anatomy, I don't want you to use that jutsu again. Please. Naruto said, sure, But what about the harem jutsu? Tenten asked. Harem jutsu. I'm afraid to ask. Naruto said. I came up with it earlier today when I knocked Gigi out again. It's basically a no jutsu being performed by Kajbunshin. Tenten shook her head and said, then don't use that either. Once you have learned the human anatomy, then I'll work with you a little bit to see if you can complete that jutsu or get it closer to accurate. I'm touched that you're trying to make things better for Kunoichi, but you're going about it the wrong way right now. There's more to being a woman than looks though, and I wouldn't put a lot of time into that right now since you're spreading yourself out so much already. Naruto said, alright, I'll work on the other things for right now, but are you still mad at me? Tenten snorts and said, no Naruto. It's just that the way you were doing that jutsu was like a slap in the face to me toward working on my dream. I want to show women are just as good as men, but the way you displayed a woman makes us seem like objects, which is something we're not. Naruto said, sorry, I hate to say this, but there are a lot of things I don't know. You've been so nice to me, and when I do something to make you mad, it hurts because I don't want you to be mad at me since you're my first real friend. Tenten asked. You've never had anyone else? In a questioning tone. Naruto said, well, when I first joined the academy the first couple of days, Sakura-chan was nice to me, but then she started to hang out with Ino and she didn't have time for me and started calling me an idiot because of mistakes I made in. I think that might be why I try so hard to get her to go out with me, is because I want to get my friend back, but no matter what I try to do, it never seems to work. I also hung out with Kiba, Shikamaru, and Choji, but after we skipped school twice to go play and their parents came and got them, Shikamaru said it was too troublesome. Choji wanted to be with Shikamaru and Kiba got his dog companion and started spending all his time with Akamaru. I don't think they were getting away from me because of Kyuubi though, because they never seemed scared of me, just annoyed and kept calling me a baka and dead last. Tenten rubbed her temples and said, okay, new rule, forget everything before the night you learned about Kyuubi, act like it never happened. Like the day you start your period and think you bleeding to death, forget about that also. Naruto frowned and said, what does a mark at the end of a sentence have to do with bleeding to death? Tenten couldn't take it and burst out laughing and said, oh god Naruto, you're so naive, I don't know if I should hug you or kill you. Alright, I can't handle you being clueless on that subject anymore or I will go insane. Naruto, as she began to explain about periods and reproductive organs. By the time she was done, Naruto was pale and he said, so, yeah, I think I understand why you were so upset about the no jutsu now, so, doesn't that gross you out? Tenten said, a little the first couple of times, but it's a part of me and by what it represents is a part that I desire someday. Naruto thought a moment and said, yeah, I guess when they say no pain no gain is pretty accurate for that. I mean, if you want to be a mom someday you have to deal with cramps and bloating and, yeah, as he became flushed. Tenten laughed a little and said, I think I should give my dad a hug when I get home tonight, he had to explain that to me when I started. I never knew how uncomfortable it must have been. Naruto smiled slightly and said, what's it like? Tenten said, having a period. Looking confused. Naruto said, no, I mean having a dad. Tenten thought a moment and said, dad can be strict sometimes, but I know it's because he loves me. He's overprotective, but he's also gentle. He's like the person I could tell I want anything and he would try and get it, but there are things I wouldn't ask him to get for me. There's just no way to actually describe it. Naruto looked at the sky and said, I don't know if I should feel honored and proud of my dad or hate him, as he closed his eyes. Tenten looked confused and asked, who's your dad and why would you hate him? Naruto frowned and said, when I was looking at the seal on my stomach I came across a blood seal, meaning that someone related to me had to put it there and you should be able to figure the rest out. Tenten thought a moment and her eyes widened and she said, oh. Naruto nods and said, I confronted Gigi about it earlier, telling him I figured it out but not actually saying it. I asked him if he could someday tell me about my mother, and he told me there were things I would learn, but I had to be a chunin for some and a junin for the rest without actually saying it. I understand, but it doesn't make it easy. Tenten frowned and said, "You know, I think I've been frowning so much since I met you, my face is going to get stuck like this. Look, nothing we say or do will ever change the past. We can't go back in time and change things. Don't even think about it. Odds are if you did somehow pull off the impossible, it would destroy all creation or something. We are who we are. We just have to show the rest of the world who we are." Naruto said, "My head hurts. Maybe it's from my cage bunshin, or maybe it's just thinking about all this. Do you ever just feel overwhelmed and you don't know what to do?" Tenten smiled and said, "Yeah, that was why I was at the cabin that night." Naruto said, "Why? I mean, I know your family owns it, but why go there? It looks like nobody been there for years." Tenten said, "My family, when they came to Konoha, my mom was already pregnant with me. They didn't have much money and so they bought that place. I was born in that cabin and my mom died in it. Mom had a small garden in the back and 10 flowers were her favorites that were planted there. Before she died, she named me Tenten and dad buried her in her garden. When I need time to think, I go there and just speak out loud and think she's listening to me. It might sound funny, but in a way I think you arriving was somehow arranged by mom. I mean, I was doubting my dream until I saw how determined you were, and I thought that if you could be so determined that I could be as well." Naruto smiled and said, "I like your reasons better for explaining how we met. Man, I didn't realize it was already that late," as he saw how the light had dimmed as the sun was starting to set. Tenten got up, dusting off her pants, and said, "Man, I lost all track of time. Naruto, it was nice talking with you, and we have to do this sometime. It was fun just getting to know you a little and talking about myself. I'll come by here and see you when I get the chance, but it might be a little while since I got to work at my family shop all this week after missions. Remember this, Naruto, there are no I's in teamwork or teams. CYA." As she quickly left. The next day, Naruto walked into the academy in his new clothes, and several people blinked as they saw this, and Kiba said, "Hey Dobi, what are you doing here? This is only for those who passed." Naruto said, "I did pass, dog breath. Mizuki made a mistake on my test that was later found out and I passed." Sasuke grunted and asked, "What's with the sword, Dobi?" Naruto smiled and said, "Well, Tem, you know how everyone is always able to beat me with taijutsu because your arms and legs are longer than mine. Since you punches and kicks reach me before mine can reach yours, I got a weapon so my blade can get you before your arms and legs can get me." Several people blinked at this, and Shikamaru muttered, "Troublesome," as he sat his head back down. Naruto began to walk over toward the seat with Sasuke and thought, "I want to read some more, but I can't show anyone that book." As he turned and walked up the aisle to the seat behind Sasuke and sat down at an empty seat and pulled out a scroll before he unsealed a book, and everyone looked at him when the book was released, and Amy asked, "What was that?" Naruto said, "Just releasing a book I got from the storage seal. The guy the first got it from put it in. Man, it's like you guys are the idiots while I'm the guy you're trying to learn from." As he opened the book, Amy snorts and said, "As if baka," as she crossed her arms and sat down. Naruto muttered, "Whatever," as he began to read. Kiba asked, "What you reading, Dobi?" Naruto, who was getting angry, said, "How to Kill a Mud in 3 Easy Steps," as he went back to reading as a few people snickered. Kiba growled and said, "What was that, Dobi?" Naruto looked up and said, "Back the off, Kiba. I'm trying to stay out of everyone's way, and you and everyone else here are pissing me off asking me stupid ass questions that you can answer yourself by just looking, but maybe for a dumb mud like you the thought of actually looking and thinking instead of sniffing your is to advance for you." Kiba growled again and said, "You want to make me Dobi?" Naruto said, "Sorry, I may not be the smartest here, but I know to walk around dogshit, not get my hands dirty playing with it." Kiba sneered and began to move when he was frozen in place, and he said, "What the hell, why can't I move?" Shikamaru said, "Troublesome, Because I trapped you in my shadow Kiba. Naruto is right. Everyone here has been bugging him about stupid shit that you all could have answered yourself if you just looked. He pulled out a scroll and unsealed a book. You all saw the smoke release and have seen that done hundreds of times while here at that academy, so that should be nothing new. As for what he's reading, it's a book on chakra theory. It says so on the book cover. You asked him why he was here when all you had to do was look at his forehead and see he actually does have a hiatus, and if he wasn't supposed to be here then Iruka-sensei would have kicked him out when he got here. The sword surprised even me, but it's too troublesome to think about because his explanation was well thought out and very smart, showing he is trying to take being a ninja seriously. Also, if you notice, he didn't sit in his regular spot where he would most likely been beat on by Sakura and Ino when they get here in a few minutes, showing he actually being smart. So calm down before you get in trouble for fighting another ninja. As he released his jutsu, Kiba turned and said, "Why the hell did you stop me from showing that loser who's top dog?" Shikamaru said, "Troublesome, because Kiba, you're actually being more troublesome than Ino, and she is very troublesome." Naruto sighed and said, "Thanks Shikamaru, I didn't want a fight, we're all ninja of Konoha, we're supposed to all get along, there's no I in team or teamwork." Shikamaru eyes widened slightly and he said, "Troublesome, so do you think Mizuki-sensei will be here today Naruto?" Naruto eyes widened slightly and looked over at Shikamaru and said, "Why?" Shikamaru, who had lowered his eyes, shrugs, and Naruto frowned and said, "No, he was injured by a kunai to the spine. I doubt he will ever be back." Shikamaru nods and said, "I see." Sasuke asked, "And how do you know Mizuki was injured to the spine?" Naruto said, "The person who threw the kunai told me, he was trespassing on private property and started trouble. That's about all I know though." Just then Ino and Sakura came in and both started to scream at each other about who was going to sit down by Sasuke, and Naruto smirked and said, "Hey Sasuke, why don't you get in the middle so both of them can sit by you and share?" Sasuke eyes widened and paled as all the guys in class began to snicker and laugh, and Sakura and Ino both blinked and looked at each other and then at the seat and then at Sasuke, and then both turned to Naruto, and Sakura said, "Naruto, what are you doing here?" Ino said, "And how come you said that?" Naruto tapped his hiatus and said, "A friend of mine says work smarter, not harder. There's plenty of room on these seats for 3 people, so why not ask Sasuke to move to the middle, and if he refuses, make him decide. Isn't that what all these years of you both fighting is over, trying to decide for him who he wants? Well, why not ask him to choose? Then the one who doesn't get him will be able to move on with her life." Shikamaru said, "Naruto, your friend is very wise." Naruto said, "Yeah, she is." Ino said, Sasuke-kun, would you move so we both can sit by you?" Sasuke grunted but did not move, and Kiba, who was holding his side to keep from laughing at Sasuke, said, "So Sasuke, who's it going to be, Sakura or Ino?" Sasuke looked out the window and kept quiet, and Naruto said, "Sorry girls, looks like he doesn't like either of you. He's checking out the woman walking down the road in the leather coat." Both girls looked outside and saw Anko walking by, and both glared at her as Sasuke eyes widened and thought, "Must kill Dobi," and said, "No, I'm not." Naruto said in an innocent tone, "But she's the only person outside. When asked to choose the woman you wanted to be with, you looked at her. How can you deny it with both Ino and Sakura there giving their hearts to you? Are you just playing hard to get, or is it that you have a secret crush on an older woman and don't want to hurt Sakura and Ino feelings, or are you just secretly gay?" Sasuke turned and glared at Naruto and opened his mouth to say something as the guy behind him turned at the same time, and the next moment Sasuke was kissing Naruto, who was wide-eyed. Naruto jumped to his feet and slammed his fist, accidentally sending chakra to his arms and fist as he punched Sasuke in the face, sending Sasuke flying, and screamed, "You bastard, that was my first kiss," as he began to spit on the ground. Iruka walked in the class at that moment and saw Sasuke laying on the ground and saw Naruto spitting on the ground, and all the guys in the class were laughing their off as the girls looked shocked and hurt, and Iruka asked, Did I miss something?" Naruto looked up and pointed to Sasuke and said, "That bastard just stole my first kiss. He was asked who he wanted to be with and he kissed me." Angrily. A voice from the door said, "Naruto, why are you being so loud?" Naruto blinked and said, "Tenten, what are you doing here?" Tenten said, "My team was asked to come help Iruka-sensei with getting everything registered for those who passed since Mizuki not able to." "Now what are you being so loud about?" Naruto pointed to Sasuke who was holding his face and said, "I told Sakura and Ino they needed to work smarter, not harder because they've been rivals for Sasuke love since they were 7 and broke up their friendship to be with him. They were fighting to see who would sit by him and I suggested Sasuke to move to the middle so they both could sit or if he didn't do that make him choose who would sit by him. The girls asked him and he looked outside instead of answering and this woman in a leather trench coat walked by and since she was the only person outside I asked was that who he wanted to be with. He denied it and I asked if he didn't like that woman then why is it that he was giving the girls here a cold shoulder and asked is it he didn't want to hurt their feelings or was it he was secretly gay. He turned around and the next thing I know the bastard was kissing me stealing my first kiss so I punched him." Tenten slapped her head and said, "Okay Naruto, new rule, when someone asks a question answer as simply as possible. You could have answered my question with the simple sentence, he kissed me when I asked him if he was gay so I punched him. I didn't care about those girls' history and I don't care about their love life or why you asked if he was gay. If I did care I would ask another question." Naruto sighed and said, "Sorry Tenten." Iruka blinked and looked at Tenten and said, "You actually got Naruto to listen how?" Tenten said, "I was the one who stabbed Mizuki in the spine when he was trespassing on my family property the other night. Naruto and I became friends after that." Iruka's eyes widened and he looked at Naruto who nods and Iruka said, "I see, Naruto said, "Hey Iruka-sensei, don't worry about my friend here. Things are cool with everyone. So can we get this over with because I need to go wash my mouth out?" With a sour look on his face. Iruka said, Yeah, let's get that taken care of." "Sasuke, are you okay? Your face is swelling." Sasuke opened his mouth and winced and said, "My jaw." Iruka frowned and said, "I think you might have broken it." Team 7 is Sasuke, Sakura, and Naruto. You can go to the nurse to get your jaw checked out. Sasuke and Naruto, you can go wash out your mouth. Naruto said, "Thank God." As he got down the stairs and then got wide-eyed and turned around and walked backwards toward the door. Tenten asked, "What the hell are you doing?" Naruto said, "Watching my around Sasuke Tem. I like girls, not guys." Sasuke glared at Naruto as all the guys burst out laughing and once Naruto and Sasuke left Neji said, "You know Tenten, I think I actually like your new friend." Kiba said, "Oh man, not you also. Maybe you and Sasuke should hook up since you both love the dobi." Neji glared at Kiba as he activated his bloodline and Tenten frowned and thought, "I see what you were saying Naruto." Neji's eyes then locked on Hinata and frowned as he deactivated his bloodline and said, "Can we just get this over with? I have other duties to attend to." Iruka said, "Right, Team 1 is." When Naruto walked back in the room he saw Iruka handing papers to Team 9 and said, "Sorry to ask but what now? And most of the class gone." Iruka said, "You have to be here for your sensei to pick you up in about 30 minutes. Naruto said, "I see, do you guys need any help?" Guy said, "No, that is alright Naruto-san, my youthful team can handle it." Naruto blinked and asked, "Youthful?" as he looked at Tenten. Tenten groaned and said, "Explain later." Naruto said, "Right," as he walked up and sat down at the desk he was at before and unsealed the book he was reading. Iruka being curious asked, "What are you reading Naruto?" Naruto said, "Chakra Theories." Iruka nods and said, "Isn't that a little advance for you right now? I mean usually people don't read things like that until they're chunin." Naruto looked up with a scowl on his face and said, "I actually find it very interesting." Did you know that you can seal a shitload of weapons into a single scroll? Uruka said, yes, but what does chakra theories have to do with sealing? Naruto smirked and said, because in theory it is possible to seal a shitload of weapons in chakra without drawing the actual seals, and in theory it is also possible to use jutsu without the use of hand signs by finding the right balance of control and balance in the seals. Hand signs and seals are basically the same, as each is nothing more than a manifestation of chakra which is balanced and control. Look at the chakra control exercise tree climbing. Too much chakra and you blow off, not enough and you don't stick. Hand signs are nothing more than an aid to a person to learn to mold their chakra in a certain pattern, and seals is nothing more than a design to mold the chakra into a certain pattern. Basically, in theory, it means you can seal a shitload of weapons in a scroll in your pocket, and without ever touching the scroll, you could mold your chakra to summon the weapons to your hand if you found the proper balance and control to do so. Uruka was shocked while the members of Team 9 were wide-eyed, and Tenten said, well, that's interesting. Hey Naruto, if that's true, then if you ever figured out that jutsu you were telling me about last night, then would it be possible to, instead of teaching that jutsu to others, to create a seal that could be used to activate the jutsu? Naruto blinked and said, in theory, why? Tenten said, well, what if you reversed it, and instead of turning you into a woman, what if you were able to turn a woman into a guy? Uruka asked, are you talking about that jutsu? As he looked between Naruto and Tenten. Naruto, who looked in thought and said, I don't see why not. I mean, even though it is a shapeshift, the theory behind it is that of a henge, so if you had in mind a guy's body when you activated it, then it might be possible. Why? Tenten smiled and said, you know how you said you wanted to protect woman on kunoichi only mission by making it where shinobi can turn into kunoichi to aid the kunoichi? Well, what if a kunoichi is captured? I mean, there are fates worse than death that we face, and so if you were able to create a seal that activated that jutsu, then the guys who captured the kunoichi wouldn't have a woman on their hands but a guy, so it could be used to either trick the enemy into releasing the kunoichi thinking she used a replacement with someone, or at least save her from the torture of what they could do to her until they killed her. I mean, I don't know if the seal would work after she's dead, but at least she wouldn't have to worry about experiencing that while alive. Naruto pulled out a pen and a paper and said, if I am able to come up with the proper balance, then I could make it where the seal would last as long as it had chakra to feed off of, and since the body holds chakra in it for several days after death, it is possible to make it once their body runs out of chakra to release it. But it should work. But the problem is, once the seal is put on a person, it won't ever be able to be removed, because in order to keep an enemy from seeing the seal and deactivating it, I would have to include a genjutsu seal along with it to hide it or cover it up somehow. I'll see what I can come up with. I'll send a couple of Kajbunshin to the library to read up on human anatomy, and also have a clone or two work on this project each day, working on a balance it out. I'll talk with Jiraiya when he comes to test me on seals and see if he could give me some help on this. I actually like the idea of it being a seal instead of a jutsu, because then I don't have to reveal the secret to my shapeshift. I can make that a family jutsu. As he began to do a few notes on the paper. Uruka blinked and said, what just happened? Tenten smiled and said, if Naruto is able to complete that seal and jutsu, then Naruto will become the savior of kunoichi everywhere, because he'll make it where we don't have to worry about being raped as woman. Uruka said, I don't mean to sound doubtful, but are you sure that you're not putting too much hope in Naruto there? I mean, what you're talking about is impossible. You can't actually change your gender. Tenten blinked and looked at Naruto and said, he doesn't know. Naruto said, I thought he did. I mean, Iruka-sensei passed out like all the other men from it, so I figured he knew the truth about it like Gigi does. Iruka said, what are you talking about? Naruto said, my no jutsu is what Gigi calls an advance henge because it's real. Watch. No jutsu. As he was covered in smoke and Iruka covered his nose and looked at Naruto and blinked when he saw Naruto had cloths on, and Naruto walked down to Iruka's desk and said, see, pull my hair. Iruka frowned and reached up and pulled on a pigtail, and his eyes went wide and said, no way, it's impossible. Naruto released the jutsu and said, "No, just difficult. I thought you knew it was real already." Iruka said, "I thought it was just a henge." Naruto frowned and said, "Well, I'm glad someone believes in me." As he looked at Tenten, Iruka frowned and said, "I'm sorry, but I don't know what to say about this, Naruto. I mean, how are you doing this?" Neji, who had activated his bloodline, said, "It's a chakra construct." He covered his body with a layer of chakra and molded it to fit the frame of the illusion he is creating. Naruto said, "Close. What I actually do is cover every inch of my body both inside and out with chakra and mold the chakra to that of what I am hanging into. I've turned myself into animals and even objects like a chair or a flagpole. As long as I can keep the mental projection active like you do for a henge of what I am changing into, then I can hold it that long and only uses about as much chakra as a henge, since the chakra I am using is absorbed back into my body, so very little is actually lost." Iruka said, "So only someone with high chakra reserves would be able to do it?" Naruto blinked and said, "No, Konohamaru, Gigi grandson. He sort of saw me knock out the old man yesterday and followed me around town bugging me to learn the no jutsu. I finally agreed, and after 2 hours he was able to pull it off." Tenten said, "You taught that to the Sandame grandson?" Angrily. Naruto waved his hand and said, "It was before we talked, I swear." Iruka frowned and said, "Oh god, Konohamaru knows the no jutsu." Naruto said, "Yeah, but I didn't do woman with him. I had him try to imitate woman we saw walking down the road." Iruka said, "Thank goodness for small miracles, so he can pull it off. Why don't you teach it to Kunoichi now, Naruto?" Naruto rubbed his head and said, "Well, it isn't finished. I mean, the clouds were covering parts of the body I don't actually know enough to reproduce. Also, I like Tenten idea of making a seal for it. That way the actual process and hand sign required will only be known by those I chose to know it." Iruka said, "But that will take a long time if ever, because you would have to learn sealing and then come up with a seal that could do what you're wanting it to do, if at all possible. I mean, you talking about creating something off a theory that might not be true." Guy said, "Iruka-san, while I agree what you are saying is true, there is also something you should realize. A few minutes ago you thought it was impossible to make an illusion real, but through hard work, time, and training it appears that he in fact made it real. Perhaps he will never succeed in doing this, but maybe what he does figure out will be used by others to make this theory him and Tenten were talking about a reality someday." Naruto said, "Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say, Iruka-sensei. I know how impossible it sounds, and I should just accept fate that I will fail and quit now. But if I did that, then I wouldn't be here today. I would have quit trying to be a ninja the first time I failed the final test, and yet here I am discussing something with fellow Konoha shinobi and Kunoichi about something that if it someday is successful, then it would make the lives of our ninja better. I mean, look at Kyuubi. The legend behind it says the Kyuubi was too powerful to be defeated, but working together the ninja of Konoha succeeded in saving our village and defeating the undefeatable when fate was telling them they would all die." Iruka sighed and Neji frowned and said, "A person is destined to a predetermined fate. It is not that you fight against fate, but what fate has decided for you to do." Naruto blinked and looked at Neji and said, "Dude, how in the hell does a girl like Tenten like you with that 3-foot fate kunai shoved up your?" Tenten gasped and said, "Naruto, you shouldn't say things like that, and how did you know that? I never told you I liked him." Naruto said, "When you were telling me about your teammates you said, Lee and Neji-kun. I may not know you very well, but I do know you wouldn't add the kun suffix to his name unless you either greatly admired him or loved him. Perhaps it is a brother-sister bond or something more, whichever case I don't know, and that's your story. I just saying I don't see how you could like him when he believes everyone is controlled by fate. Fate can kiss my blonde." Neji glared at Naruto and said, "You cannot fight fate." Naruto asked, "If that is what you believe, then I will not disagree with you, but I will not agree with you either. I agree that we do have one fate in common, and that is death, but the road to our death and how long it is to get there is one I believe that we are able to choose. Neji thought a moment and said, I don't agree. Naruto sighed and said, look, you saying that every action and every choice we make is decided by fate, right? You're saying that no amount of training, no amount of preparations, no amount of anything will change the fate of what will happen at any given moment. Is that what you're saying? Neji said, yes. Naruto said, alright, tell you what. If you and I had a fight, who would fate decide would win? Neji said, fate would declare me the winner because I have more experience than you, stronger, faster, smarter, and I am a member of the strongest clan, the Hyuga clan. Naruto said, fine, outside, right now. You and I will have a fight, your sensei will be the ref and will only stop the fight if one of us is going to die or someone is unable to continue, do you agree? You win and I will agree with you that fate is predetermined, I win and you must accept the fact that we are capable of making our own fate. Agreed. As he offered his hand. Neji said, agreed. As he shook hands with Naruto. Guy said, I don't agree. Naruto said, doesn't matter to me. I gave my word I would fight him and I never go back on my word, let's go fate's bitch. As he walked out the classroom. Neji also started walking outside and Guy said, Neji stop, I do not allow this.